These are the slides that I gave at a talk at the American Enterprise Institute on October 5th. There is a video of that talk and of the panel session on Google and antitrust, which is focused on the Bork and Sidak paper on this, on C-SPAN. My piece of that I will link to, but that tended to focus on me and less on the slides. And so if you really just want to see the slide content and hear the content associated with that, this YouTube video may be the way to go. So in any event, as people undoubtedly know, the question of how antitrust law or competition policy law might apply to Google is very much a live question. It is the European Union has been very public about what it is looking at, and the Federal Trade Commission has an ongoing investigation where press reports indicate that they are likely to make a decision on this by the end of 2012, so in the next 3 months or so. So it's a timely topic, and it's an incredibly interesting one. I want to start, and Greg Sidak framed his remarks at the conference in these terms as well, about thinking about media markets and how market power is exercised in media markets. And for me, I start with what I think Google has accomplished. So the original Google homepage is fun to go back and look at. The exclamation point is an excitable young company. And I like that. It shows you how little, in some sense, the homepage has changed in the intervening years, and their excitement about having 25 million pages. Where I start is I start with what I think of as the Google data model, because I think that has changed, and I think that's certainly one of the things that the European Union is focused on. We know a little bit less about what the FTC is looking at. And the data model was one of going out and visiting websites, crawling them, sending out the Google bot, and then building an index, a way to know what's out there, and then ranking those, where the PageRank algorithm, which is the foundation of what Google has done, the patented PageRank algorithm, is really the starting point on that. To jump ahead in the story, part of what's changed, of course, with Google over time is the fact that it's moved into the content control or content ownership business directly. And that's part of what I think is spurring the inquiry. In any event, I think what Google set out to do, and by all evidence, by all accounts, succeeded in doing, was building a great product. I assume that's Google's perspective on it as well. It's been a remarkable success story. And that's exactly what we think Silicon Valley and the rest of the country is supposed to do, and exactly what the antitrust system contemplates will happen. So if you can go out and build a great product and get market power, and market power, as Jeff Eisenach talked about in his talk at the conference, at the panel session, is the ability to charge prices above costs and do that in a sustainable way. The best source of market power is to have a great product, and to have a product quality gap between you and your competitors on a sustained basis. That's where you'll get market power, is if your products are a lot better than someone else's, better than your competitors. And I assume we think for some period of time that's been the situation in search. And antitrust law says that's great. Antitrust law says you go out, you go into the marketplace, you compete, you win. That's what we want you to do. And the link line case is very clear on this idea that what you're allowed to do in those circumstances and what will not give rise to any Section 2 Sherman Act issues is charging high prices. That's the natural result of having market power. That's as it were, the just reward. But that's not to say that because it's a media market that you can't exercise market power. So I guess I went back to look at some market shares that were comparable to those of Google in the United States today in core search. And the one that, in some sense, is stunning to me is the ratings for I Love Lucy. back in the early 1950s. So they had a rating of 67.3%. That means 2 out of 3 American television households were watching her when she was on. That's really quite remarkable. And what's critical to understand there, because it goes to the conversation that's occurring about Google, that the fact that competition is a click away, and the fact that that competition is at zero cost, that doesn't change the ability of a firm with a great product, a media firm with a great product under both circumstances, to exercise market power. So the click back in the days of I Love Lucy was not a mouse click. It was obviously the click of the TV dial. But it's a parallel situation in that viewers were not paying the TV stations directly, obviously, CBS, ABC, NBC, for watching the shows. But they pay through their consumption of advertising. And they could always click away, switch away, move to a different station, and do that at zero cost. The way you exercise market power as a media firm with a great product is through advertising volume and intensity. And you simply have more of it. And it's almost easiest to understand that in a context where you think that the firm doesn't have market power in the advertising market, where they just have market power as to consumers in either the media market in I Love Lucy's case or the search engine market in Google's case. In a situation where they don't have market power in advertising, when they don't think that what they're going to do as to advertising will change the market price of advertising, then they should simply boost the number of ads to the point that they're maximizing profits. And a media firm with market power will have more ads than we would observe in competition. Competition would cause the number of ads to go down. But a firm with market power can set the number of ads at an artificially high price. Artificially high number, and that's effectively an artificially high price to consumers who pay by consuming the ads for the product. That means we have the usual deadweight losses associated with that. Now that turns on some vision of disutility of ads, and I think that's an interesting and complicated question. I'll talk about that some in the paper that I'm doing on this. All right, where do we go from there? So I think it's critical to understand that advertising is a way in which media firms degrade the product. So this is the splash screen you will see if you try to go to the Forbes website to look at content. Forbes doesn't do that because they don't like their content or because they don't want to show it to you. Forbes does that because that's how they monetize the content, right? No one thinks that the best way to tell stories is to build up to a point of great excitement in the story and then stop for 5 minutes to sell tacos. That's not good storytelling, but it may be great monetization of the stories. And so because of the need to monetize the content, media firms degrade it. And then the question is well, how do they degrade it? And what antitrust law says is that for a media firm with market power, it's perfectly legitimate to have lots of ads, to exercise that market power that way. What you are not allowed to do, though, is to exercise that market power to either maintain that power or to increase it. That's where you get in trouble under Section 2 of the Sherman Act. All right, so I want to come back to Google. The question we have to ask in this framework is what kind of prices do we see search engines charging consumers through advertising? How intense, how many ads are there? And that's what I've spent the summer looking at. So I've done a bunch of searching on the internet. I've learned some Python. I've done some web scraping. I've done a number of things. The particular chunk of that I talked through yesterday at AEI is the searches I've run on the 77 communities that make up Chicago, so Hyde Park and Kenwood and Woodlawn and a bunch of other communities, all 77 of them. I've run searches on 10 different product categories, so like auto repair and dry cleaners and glasses, local product searches effectively, or local service searches. And I've run those searches on 6 different search engines, though for advertising purposes, just on Bing, Google, and Yahoo. That quickly adds up to something like 2,300 searches, 370,000 links. This is we've entered this world of big data, and I think of this as sort of a small big data study. And what I've done is I've effectively calculated a kind of implicit price of advertising by taking the number of advertising links in the file and dividing that by the number of organic links. All right, so that's what I've done. What do we get? Well, it's interesting what we get. What you will see in the data is that Yahoo, by far and away, has, as it were, the highest advertising prices, so the highest ratio of advertising links to organic links. While there's interesting variation between Bing and Google, on average they look like they're about the same. At least I certainly can't reject that on the tests. So that's interesting. But it's this pattern that we see here that I think turns out to be interesting to try to explain. I'll circle back to that later in the talk. All right, so where do I want to go from there? Well, one of the things that Greg talked about in his talk was this question of specialized search results, as he called it. And I want to talk about that as well, and this idea of the design choices that Google is making and the nature of link competition. So this is a result for a search I ran over the summer. One of the searches, many searches I ran looking for a Hyde Park restaurant. That's, as you may know if you've been to Hyde Park, a difficult search to make, though the Hyde Park restaurant scene is improving. But what I want to focus on here is the different types of competition that's actually occurring on this page. I mean, we see these pages all the time, but I think it's really important to focus on the different competition that we're seeing here. So one piece of the competition is what we'll call organic search competition. No money involved. So firms build their websites with the hope that they will be highly ranked in Google. They may spend a lot of time trying to do that, and Google's got an algorithm for figuring out who should be ranked. And if you looked at the Hyde Park restaurant result, the top two results are those kinds of organic links, one of which is to a University of Chicago, a top link, a University of Chicago description of restaurant life in Hyde Park. So that's one type of competition, no money involved. Second type of competition is obviously the advertising link that we see to the right, where Google has built these auctions. And where it's strictly a question of dollar competition. I think there's interesting things to say about that. I have a talk on YouTube in an Intelligence Squared debate from a number of years ago in which I talk through some of that. But that's robust competition that everyone can participate on. Whether Google's exercising market power there, different question. And certainly whether there are any antitrust issues, different question. Not what I'm talking about on these slides. But those are two very different approaches to competition. And it means, just so we get that someone who's maybe not succeeding in the organic competition and getting on this page has a second path for getting on the page. That goes back a little bit to this question of how should we think about the advertising links as additional information, additional value, or as inferior to the organic links on the page. All right. But what I want to focus on are what I'll call the hardwired links. And so if you look at the product bar at the top, carefully, there are hardwired links to YouTube, among other Google products. There's no competition for those. Google is not looking at other video sites. There is no auctions there. It's simply a hardwired link. And that's also true with regard to the maps. There are multiple map services. None of those appear here. This is a way in which Google has hardwired the results for both the product bar at the top and YouTube in particular, and then the maps in favor of Google. But the real topic of interest, part of what Judge Bork and Greg Sidak talk about in their paper, and certainly what's at the heart of the EU investigation, the Almunia speech from May makes this clear, is what Google calls the one-box result. And the one-box result has a number of components to it. But the key piece that the EU is focusing on is not the collection of these restaurants together, I think. I think that search is evolving towards more direct answers. I think that's a natural evolution. And I don't think that's the subject of the EU investigation, and to my knowledge, not the subject of the FTC investigation, though they're much less public about what they're doing. Instead, what the EU is focusing on are the review links, and those seem to be hardwired in favor of Google. I say seem. I think there's less information, public information about what Google's doing there, but that's what we seem to be seeing. So perhaps organic competition among the restaurants who show up in the one box, but hardwired to Google on the reviews. I think that raises a number of legal issues, right? So I think if you're the Federal Trade Commission has two different paths they can go down. They seem to find it very easy to go down a deceptive practice path. We've seen that most recently in the Google Buzz, MySpace, and Facebook settlements. It's easier when doing antitrust to say, oh, you didn't say something you should have said, or you said one thing and then changed your mind about it. The FTC does have these short search engine guidelines, which led to the separation that we've observed between advertising on the one hand and organic links on the other. And the Google reviews I think it's not clear what's going on there. Are those appearing completely organically? Are they in some sense kind of advertising for other Google products? These links all go to Google Plus pages, and Google Plus, of course, is Google's effort to compete more successfully in the social space and in the reviews space. So compete in the social space with Facebook and in the reviews space with places like Yelp. What's going on there is not, I think, at least clear to me. And so I don't know whether this is a deceptive practice. I'll be crystal clear about that. I could easily imagine the FTC wants to look at that. The second issue is not a deceptive practice issue, but it's a tying issue, which is the idea that Google is effectively tying its reviews results, where it's very much competing for reviews with people like Yelp and competing in social with Facebook to the organic search results. And I think that the European Union and DG Comp, the Competition Bureau, have been very aggressive on these tying issues in both the Microsoft Media Player case and the Microsoft Internet Explorer case. And I think that's quite plausibly the path that they will go down. The other thing that's really interesting here is that if you run this search, but you make a subtle technical change, so this is a search that I ran in Firefox, and if you say, and you can say, oh, I'm not going to be Firefox today, but I'm going to pretend to tell the search engine that I'm Internet Explorer. So one of the things you can do is try different browsers for searching, and it turns out you get different results. And if you set your browser on Internet Explorer 6, if you say I'm a really old browser, then what you get here is that Google comes back with a version of the one box, but they actually show multiple review sites. Here are links for OpenTable, Menu Pages, and Urban Spoon, in addition to the Google Reviews site. So you get some sense of the way in which it would be straightforward to serve up multiple review sites, and the fact that Google actually currently does that to people looking at the browser, looking for information using Internet Explorer 6. Okay, that's quite interesting. The one box. The one box turns out to be more interesting. So typically in a restaurant result, you get 7 one box items. If you run a search on bookstores in Hyde Park, you actually get a one box with 3 items. And so that's an interesting difference. And if you run a search on Hyde Park hair salons, then you actually don't get a one box at all. So it turns out that there's variation in the one box results. And if you want to do statistics, then you need variation, and it turns out you can go ahead and count the one box results and use that, and that's what I've done. So now I want to circle back. I've got these 2 big charts now. I've got the implicit prices chart from earlier, and I've got the one box results here, and that's what I've started to work with. And I've done what you do these days. You get Stata out and you run some regressions. Now, the danger of Stata, from my perspective, is that basically any damn fool with a license can run regressions, and I'm pretty sure some days that damn fool is me. So I wouldn't take these results to the bank. I wouldn't make too much of them. I think this is, for me, I'm at early stages or mid stages on this research, and I'm constantly learning new things, and my views are evolving. So, but nonetheless, so here's what I've done. I regressed this implicit price on the one box structure. That turns out to be very important in accounting for Google's The presence of Google links on the web page. I've got measures for how you think about that. That's this Google total share figure you see there. And then the question is well, what's the relationship, taking into account already the one-box structure, between the Google total share we see, in some sense the Google presence, the number of Google links on the page, sort of taking into account their rankings. It's probably important to do, and these calculations do that. To what extent do we see Google substituting out of advertising in situations where they put up a lot of Google links? And the negative coefficient here we have suggests that they're doing that, and that in situations where Google puts a lot of Google links on the page, they don't have as much advertising. And the idea there would be, and now we're circling back to this question, which is, if Google has market power, and be clear, I haven't said that they do. I don't know if they do. I don't know that I've got all the information to understand that. I certainly don't have any of the information on the advertising side. You'd have to be Google or Microsoft or the government to have any sense of that. But as I said at the beginning, I could easily imagine that Google has market power in the sense that they've been a wonderfully successful firm that's built a great product and seem to have a sustainable product quality advantage, and that's associated with market power typically. The question isn't in some sense whether they have market power, and antitrust encourages them to go out and succeed and compete. The question is what they're doing with that market power, right? And what they're not allowed to do is to substitute out of exercising that market power through, as it were, high advertising prices, and instead to be spending that power on building up their social products, the Google Plus sites. That's what we would regard as impermissible. You know, in the questions on the talk, and you can watch the full version of the panel program on C-SPAN. You know, I think that was what Microsoft got in trouble for with regard to Internet Explorer. The really, really interesting point in antitrust is where interesting adjacent market competition emerges. Firms typically don't get targeted in their home market. They get targeted in adjacent markets, and then that adjacent market becomes important. That was clearly how Microsoft saw Netscape Navigator. And that seems to be how we should think about what's going on, maybe, with regard to Yelp and Facebook here. Remedies. So what would we do if we thought there was an actual problem? Well, I guess I want to put a couple of ideas on the table. I want to say, you know, that this question of the acceptable path of entry for Google and any firm into this adjacent market is really tricky and interesting. And I don't know that antitrust understands it very well. Microsoft obviously tried to defend what it was doing with regard to the browser space by saying they were competing in that space with Netscape Navigator. We've seen Google enter spaces in any number of ways, and figuring out what's an acceptable entry path for a dominant firm is I think a challenge for antitrust. There are social benefits of the competition that Google was creating. The EU is concerned about scraping. There's a lot more to be said about scraping, but there's no question that scraping reduces switching costs, and that may be beneficial to competition. Okay, how should we think about what some of the possible remedy choices are? Well, Google started with an original data model, and then it was a data model of crawling, indexing, and ranking. And that seems to be exactly what they continue to do with regard to YouTube. So Eric Schmidt testified in Congress in September and then provided a written response to questions. He was very clear about how Google access to YouTube, at least with regard to organic search results. They could do that with regard to Google Plus pages. I don't know what they're doing with regard to those pages in the one box. It doesn't appear to me that's what they're doing. You can sort of look at the number of reviews. You can look at to what extent the Google presence tracks the number of reviews available. None of that seems to match up. So it doesn't seem like they're playing a YouTube-type strategy, the crawl, index, and rank strategy for Google Plus pages. Remedy. So the remedy path that the EU has gone down in the Microsoft case is the browser ballot, which means that the first time you turn on a Windows PC, a Windows 7 PC, and go on the internet, you're presented with a choice of browsers. And 5 of them show up on the first screen. Those rotate around. There are actually, I think, originally 14 browsers, so if you horizontally scroll to the right, you would see those. That remedy's got issues, and now there's a big fight about it because Microsoft didn't implement it fully. That's a different discussion. But as I think about what the EU might be likely to do, I think they're going to focus on these reviews pages. I think they're going to focus on the fact that it's straightforward for Google to offer multiple reviews. They obviously are doing that right now. If you ask for a web page like Hyde Park Restaurants with Internet Explorer 6, and I think that we're likely to see the EU move down that path. Don't know what the FTC would do. There's some discussion in the Bork and Sidek paper, but obviously there's only one top slot, so what can you do? I think that's a red herring. I don't think that's accurate. I think that focuses on the fact that there's a single search result, and the reality is Google sees thousands of searches, and it need not respond to each of those searches identically, and that over 10,000 Hyde Park Restaurant searches, even if there's only a single review slot, it could provide any number of, statistically, any number of firms ranked in those slots. So it could have 1,000 Google Plus reviews, and it could have 1,000 Yelp reviews, and 500 Bing reviews, and you can see where that could go. But you could get basically any statistical level you wanted there. Don't focus on what it means for a single search. Think about what it means for 10,000 searches. It also means we could sort of evaluate the antitrust remedy, because Google does this kind of A/B testing, experimenting with pages and seeing the consequences of that. The possibility of sort of a dynamic antitrust remedy is actually really one of the very interesting things here. So I think there's a broad question here about what we think a firm like Google is able to do, and what that means they should be doing with regard to the review slots. And you see on this last slide, in some sense, some of the options, where they're clearly doing hard wiring with regard to, for example, YouTube and the products bar. Are they allowed to hard wire with regard to the reviews slot? We could insist that those be auctioned off. We could insist that they do what they do vis-a-vis YouTube. And we could, as a remedy, move towards this kind of statistical browser ballot. But that seems to me the issues that are on the table. So thank you.